Okay, so in this section, we're going to talk about how we can deliver the training. And of course, there are traditional approaches, there are newer technology-based approaches, and then there are what are called employee development-based approaches. So let's deal with these one by one. Okay, traditional approaches. Um, there we go. Okay. Classic, most traditional approach would be the lecture. Um, in lectures, of course, you're going to have a teacher at the front saying stuff to learners who are supposedly encoding that information in some fashion. They're writing it down or just, trying to store it in memory or whatever. The benefit of lecture, and one of the reasons why it's lasted so long as a technique, is that it's economical. You can get an entire group of trainees together all at once and one teacher. So it costs the least amount of money, and then it's quick, right? So maybe 1 day of training and you're done, or maybe half a day of training and you're done. Of course, the effectiveness greatly varies depending on, a number of factors. Part of it has to do with the trainee, right? Are they motivated and those kinds of things? Some of it has to do with the trainer. Are they good at what they're doing and are they conveying the information well? But it also varies based on what kind of material you're training. Like, if you're just training facts and knowledge, kind of like we do in college. Whoops, I just dropped my computer. Okay. In college, we're largely training a lot of facts and knowledge. So that's why you see a lot of lecture in college. It's kind of the most efficient way to go from here's what I know to here's what I expect you to know. But if you're trying to train problem-solving skills, like for me, research methods is a good example of a situation where you're trying to teach problem-solving skills. Or interpersonal skills. If you're trying to train a new customer service representative, these kinds of things. How are you going to lecture on those on how to provide good customer service? I mean, maybe you could lecture on certain principles, but then there's got to be more, right? It's probably not going to work very well for that kind of topic. One of the shortcomings of lecture is that, where's the practice, right? Certainly not going to get over learning unless the learner is motivated to go home and rehearse the material on their own and practice. And, a lot of employees aren't really willing to do that. Where's the feedback? Feedback implies that the learner produced some kind of information, but I'm up here talking the whole time. So how, right? It's not conducive to a lot of the techniques that are the most effective in producing good learning. So lecture is good for certain circumstances and not for probably most circumstances. So how about another classic, on-the-job training? This is where, you follow somebody on the job and they teach you how to do it, right? This is probably the most widely used technique because, of course, if you look across all different job types, it's the one that is probably easiest to implement. Just take an incumbent, somebody who already has the job, and have them show the newcomer what to do, right? The assumption of this technique is that you can learn from an incumbent by watching an experienced person, talking to them, um, starting to work with the actual job materials with the guidance of somebody who's an incumbent, something like that. The downside is that you have to have this person who is competent to be the trainer who knows the job well enough that they can teach the new person. Instead of having a carefully planned, program that we know for sure what the quality is, we're relying on an individual to say what they think is important. And what they think is important today or with this trainee might be different from what they might think is important next week with a different trainee. And so you can get some sort of hit or miss consistency on using this on-the-job method. So most popular, but maybe the least precise. There are self-directed techniques where the trainee works at their own pace to either remedy a weakness or to train themselves in the new material that they're needing for their job. The self-directed techniques use material that are based on learning principles, so that's a benefit. It's efficient, so that's another benefit, but really it's only efficient if the learner is self-motivated. I remember when my husband got his job as a baggage handler back in the day, he was sent home with a list of all the airport codes that he needed to know as a baggage handler. Um, like, LA is LAX and SeaTac is SEA and so on. Albuquerque was ABQ. And so he had to memorize all the different airports that Southwest flew to at the time. And you might think, well, that's pretty easy. Just memorize three-letter things. If you've ever wondered why your bags get lost, one of his colleagues mistakenly thought that LAX was LAS and sent a bunch of LAX intended luggage to Las Vegas. So, sending people home with a list of stuff that they're supposed to memorize is a great idea if they're motivated to learn it, and they have good attention to detail also. But, this is one of those things that he probably for sure after one time learned LAX was Los Angeles. Probably one trial learning, hopefully. Another traditional approach is to use some kind of virtual reality training. Now, you might say to yourself, isn't this a technology approach? But I mean, even in the olden days, there was an attempt to do virtual reality. It might not have been computer-based, but you would have like astronauts training for weightlessness in a pool, right? That's kind of virtual reality, right? Nowadays, it's computer-assisted, and so I have a guy with a virtual reality helmet on learning to become an astronaut. Whatever method you're using in virtual reality, you want it to be as realistic as possible so that the trainees can easily transfer their skills. You would use this kind of training when it's important for them to learn skills when it might be too dangerous to have them actually doing it on the job, or maybe it costs too much or it's inefficient. I mean, how are you going to train an astronaut to do the stuff you need to be able to do as an astronaut before they've become competent to be astronauts and probably have no business being in space, right? Or pilots. You can't be letting them fly planes when they don't know how to fly a plane. So you have to, right? So you have to have these different techniques. And virtual reality can be used for a lot of different things. I don't know if you guys have heard that it can be used for treating phobias and stuff like that, because you can really get enmeshed in this virtual reality, right? So you really feel like, let's say you're an arachnophobe, you really feel like you're in the kitchen and oh my gosh, there's a spider, right? You really feel like you're there, and so it actually has the same effect. And so when you're training using virtual reality, you can have maybe stressors. You've got alarms going off and things are jolting, and you can feel it all in your body and see it in your face, in front of your face, and it's all very real. So the factors that affect the effectiveness of this technique is, for one thing, how well does it really mimic the real world? It's interesting, in the arachnophobia treatment, the virtual world doesn't even have to be all that real. It works really well, even though it looks like a completely fake kitchen and things like that. But for the training purposes, we want to try and make the world as real as it possibly can be, and give the learner the experience that's as much like the real world without the danger and risk of death and stuff like that. And then psychological fidelity refers to, whether in your mind the demands are the same as they are in the real world. Like, is there urgency? Is there sequential things that need to be done, in a particular order, and it has to be done in that same order in the simulator, stuff like that. Like, the behavior that you have to do in the simulator needs to be the same as the behavior that you need to do in the real job to make this a really effective technique. So these are considered traditional approaches. Technology-based approaches, oddly enough, are going to rely on technology for their success. So they're sort of the classic, in my opinion, the audio-visual. This has a picture of a CD-ROM. In my world as a teacher, telecourses would be an example of an audio-visual medium, right? The idea is some kind of audio-visual or maybe multimedia presentation. It could be in the form of a TV show or something like that, is used for the presentation. Now, it can be as effective as a live lecture because it's basically a live lecture, except for you're not in the room with the instructor. One of the benefits of audiovisual is that it's more flexible because, if you did fade out for a moment, weren't paying attention, you can go, oh, wait a second, I wasn't listening. You can back up, right? You can't pause the lecture and go back in real life, right? I was just watching TV on, oh my gosh, one that doesn't have, that Comcast pause thing. And I wasn't looking at the TV and something happened and everybody laughed and I wanted to see it. And I'm like, dang it, I can't rewind this TV. That kind of flexibility I've gotten a little addicted to. And that's, that can benefit learning, to be able to stop it, go over it again. Did I not pay attention? Did they not speak clearly? And now if I play it again, I'll hear it. Things like that. Trainees tend to report greater interest and satisfaction in audio-visual presentations than they do in lecture presentations, so that's an advantage. It's kind of less expensive in a lot of ways because you can record it once and then maybe do a little editing, jazz it up a little bit, and then send it out to all your trainees. And so in the long run, it costs you less, and then they're more satisfied and experience more interest in it, so it has some benefits. Distance learning historically has been things like telecourses. It can also be things like what I've got in my little picture here is the guy giving the live lecture and then other people in distant areas are watching it. Some of you may have taken classes like that at Eastern where you're over here and the teacher is over on main campus and you're watching via teleconference. That's distance learning. So it's you've got learners in different locations, but they're all experiencing the lecture at the same time. Of course, this is a really efficient use of your instructor, and it gives you as the learner, you're responsible for your own success because you don't have the teacher necessarily in the room sort of making you feel like you have to act like you're interested. You're interested or you're not, you're responsible for it yourself. It saves the company a lot of money. I know, flying instructors around from, one franchise to the next or whatever might be cost prohibitive. So if you can do gather everybody in each franchise to watch the simulcast all at one time, that's much more efficient. Then there's e-learning, and you guys have all probably had experience with this as a student, where we're going to deliver the information via the internet, sort of like what we're doing right now. The employee is going to work at their own pace, usually in a training scenario. That's not necessarily the case when you're taking an online class, right, where you do have like sort of asynchronous learning in an online class, but you still have deadlines and things like that. A lot of times with e-learning training, you're given maybe a window. Okay, you need to get this done within a month, but there's not a series of deadlines within that. So it's a little bit more flexible than e-learning in colleges usually. One of the benefits of using the internet is it is easy to update your information or change the information. If you've burnt everything onto CD-ROMs for your audio-visual presentation, that's going to be pretty tough to change. Whereas with e-learning, you can just change the material, do a different link or whatever. It's convenient for everybody involved, for the person who's teaching, for the person who's learning. So if you have lots of people dispersed in lots of different places, or maybe people who work different shifts, to try and get your 9 to 5 people, your 5 to 11 people, and your 11 to 7 people all to be able to find a time when they can all be there is difficult. So if you use an internet-based strategy, you could they can all do it when it's appropriate for them. Some research has shown that it might be even more effective to use e-learning than to do classroom-based training. But, as a person, I've done research in this area, and one of the things I have to point out is there is a lot of variability in how these courses are structured. And so those factors can really be a moderating variable in how effective the technique is. So, if you have a really great classroom-based training session that involves all sorts of active learning and practice and all sorts of stuff, versus a very flat, boring, bunch of reading, internet-based delivery, I think you can all guess which one's going to produce better learning. The dominant training method in the U.S. right now is a combination of distance learning and e-learning. It combines the best of both worlds, where you have in distance learning, you could have your president do the talk. You could have your chief training officer do the talk, and everybody in the company gets to see the same person, and that could be a really dynamic person. And then pair it with some e-learning stuff, some exercises, some quizzes, some discussion boards, stuff like that. And you can end up with a really good dynamic, integral, really beneficial training session. If you want to go one step further, you could do what we call blended learning, which is to do a combination of distance learning, e-learning, and then spend some time in the classroom. To sort of, give that face-to-face time, that sense of investment, that sense of I'm getting to know people at work, that kind of thing. So if you really want to go one step further, you can do blended learning. All right, our final technique is the employee development-based approaches. And we've got orientation training and new employee socialization as one employee development-based approach. The idea in this approach is to help the individual to acquire the culture of the organization. So we may have an orientation session where everybody gets to know each other, or where we're going to introduce all the important people in the organization so that you know who to go to when you have questions, or who's in charge of payroll because my checks haven't been deposited. Oh, I met them at orientation. Or who's my counterpart who works the swing shift, so that I know who's at my desk when I'm not there, those kinds of things. In a new employee orientation or socialization strategy, the goal is to build teamwork and to help solidify what our attitudes are, what our culture is in this organization. Coaching is where supervisors advise and develop goals for improving performance, and then they follow up with guidance, with facilitation, which means to provide, help, techniques, a boost, contact to connections that can help. A lot of times your coach, your supervisor will know who you need to reach out to get to accomplish your goals. And then inspiration. Supervisor is going to be really important in helping to keep you on track and motivated as an employee. So they can serve as sort of your cheerleader, your inspiration, your goal setter, to help you to be your best. Now there's something kind of new that you've probably heard about. I say kind of new because it's probably been 20 years now. Anything since 1987 is considered new in my book. But anyway, executive coaching, which is where instead of looking to a supervisor, an executive oftentimes doesn't have a supervisor, but they still want to be their best selves. They still want to do a good job. And so you hire maybe a consultant to come in and work with your executives, or you as an executive could hire your own coach. And the coach's job is to do all the same things that I described, except for they're not your supervisor. They're a paid person whose sole job is to coach the execs. Behavior modeling. Most social behavior in our lives is acquired through modeling. By looking around, what is everybody else doing? How should I be acting in this situation? What kind of clothing should I wear? What behaviors are okay and which ones are not? That kind of thing. So people skills are largely acquired through behavior modeling. So we can take advantage of that by pairing employees with other employees who have really good interpersonal skills, for example. And, a lot of times companies will identify, Betty is awesome at teaching customer service. So new employees are going to get paired with Betty, and Betty's going to show them how you react when a customer complains. She's going to show them how you how you direct calls to the right person, these kinds of interpersonal skills that are hard to lecture about and are hard to explain. But when you see it, you know it. So the goal in behavior modeling is to provide a good model, and the goal is that the trainee will pick up those behaviors. Business simulations. This is kind of, a lot of times this is marketed as a game. Managers are given a brief introduction of a fictitious company's background, what their situation is, what organizational problems they have, what their goals are, whatever. And then they're asked to make decisions. And sometimes you'll be placed in groups. This is a training session that's its goal is to improve managerial skills. So a lot of times they'll put the managers into groups to work together. Sometimes they'll pit managers against each other to see who will come up with a better strategy. Like I said, it's kind of posed in the form of a game a lot of the time. Unfortunately, one downside of this technique is that sometimes the managers get competitive with each other rather than seeing it as an opportunity to grow themselves. They're thinking, well, I just want to do better than the other team. And so it doesn't necessarily transfer that training into the real world. All they know is that they won the game. That's kind of not the point. And then finally, the last example of an employee development-based technique is corporate universities. A lot of companies have started to make their own classrooms with modern facilities, with up-to-date technology. The goal in these universities is to specifically train those behaviors that are valued at the company. And because it's so specific to the company, it allows for really effective, positive transfer to when they get back to work. Examples of corporate universities would be like GE has one, Motorola, McDonald's has it, Caterpillar has it. So these are companies who have certain things that they really want their employees to know, and it's worth their time and effort to send them, certain select employees oftentimes will be sent to the university, and sometimes it's paid for by the franchise or whatever. But it's very specific training to help their employees to be the best employee for this company by teaching them exactly the stuff that they need to know for this company. Okay, let's go ahead and stop here, and we'll come back and talk about evaluating training in the next segment.